Hello, everybody. Okay, Before the Rain, rain singular, because there's another film that's Before the Rains, plural, which is Indian drama. No. Before the Rain was made by, written, directed Milcho Manchevski. I may be butchering the name. He is originally born in Macedonia. Just a quick word. We are talking about the ex-Yugoslavia, which was Serbia, Macedonia, bordering on Albania, which is important in this film. But it was what is now 6 countries, was once Yugoslavia. So in the 90s, as we know, it imploded. One of the worst, most horrible wars with all sorts of really brutal things going on. Our director is originally Macedonian. He managed to get a fellowship and come to Illinois, Carbondale, Illinois, where he went to film school and then remained in the United States for 12 years. He wanted to make a film that addressed what was going on, this unending internal warring in Macedonia and the countries around it. So he made a film called Before the Rain. The title we'll go into later. Let's see the general preview for it. You will see the beautiful photography. And then I'm going to talk about how unusual this film is and why I think you will it benefits discussing it before you see it.
His photographs were like moments of truth, captured forever.
This is Alexander Kirchhoff. He's the one who won the Pulitzer Prize last month.
How nice for you. He wanted me to be with him, to leave everything behind. My job, my husband, my life.
I have to be here. Please, try and understand.
For somewhere strange and unfamiliar to me.
Don't forget to write.
Where old struggles ignite new passions. And there is great danger everywhere.
Gramercy Pictures presents an unforgettable motion picture.
Hello? I need to speak to Alexander Kirchhoff, please.
Once you hear the words,
What happened to you? What did they do to you out there?
once you know the faces,
I learned. I aged. I took sides.
once you see the pictures, you will begin to understand the story.
My camera killed a man.
Oh my God.
I never showed those pictures to anyone. They are yours now. Love, Alexander.
For a film from a first-time film director, this was his first film. He had been making music videos before this. It went on to win the Venice Film Festival, nominated for an Academy Award for Best Foreign Film, is in, I mean, there's many of these lists, but one of the 50 greatest films ever made. So this is a formidable work, we have to admit. It was put together in an unusual way. There are 3 parts to it. The first section is in Macedonia, filmed in Macedonia. Suddenly that part's over and you are in London, present-day London. That is the second segment of it. The film then switches back to Macedonia for the third and final section of it. It takes concentration to follow this. And the director himself has said, I don't make films to make it easy for people. I want them to concentrate and think about this. So we're going to hear today the really wonderful film critic and she happens to be the head of the New York, of Columbia Graduate School Film Division, Annette Insdorf. She is going to be discussing the film with the director, and we're going to hear their comments for some long segments. Let's go now and look at the middle section first. Let me interject here. The director says this is a film where you could look at the middle section first, then the third section, then the first section. It would all make sense. I am disagreeing with that a little bit. I mean, he can say that. And Annette Insdorf, I think, gently objected as well. But the film is so great that it's worth a little of the ambiguity and maybe the what that you'll do. Second time you follow it very much more easily. So let's go now. I want to go to this middle section, which was filmed in London. The point being that these wars that go on all over the place affect us everywhere. They affect us in New York. They affect us in Washington. And here, it's affecting in London. So let's hear the two of them talking, and we'll see a little of the action in London. And I think this is going to make the film flow better for you when you watch.
There are palm trees growing in Oxford Street. So what happened in Bosnia? Why are you back?
I'm free. I resigned this morning.
Oh, yeah. So you just resigned from...
The reflections in the car windows, which is part of that whole theme in the second part, how they are, people are in an aquarium and everything is smooth and slick and nice, and it's not muds and stick and organic.
I could have been a pretender. I read a book, Zen and the Art of Tomato Growing. You'll wash and cook for me.
No, I won't.
I'll teach you Macedonian.
Idija bi se, te sakam, dosta.
We'll have 12 children.
Macedonia isn't safe.
But of course it is.
We had to shoot this scene very quickly, so it was just a few takes, driving around London with the camera outside, and then a couple of takes with the camera inside. And actually, I needed one more take, but just didn't have the time. And in editing it, I was wondering whether we should go inside and leave those reflections behind, because the reflections are obviously part of this theme. But then I realized it's much more important to be with the people, to get under their skin and to feel what they feel, than to be stuck on the form.
Don't worry about my hand.
Well, to be honest with you, when I saw this, the notion of a bickering couple inside a car and having the reflections on the windshield, it made me think of another first feature that I think bears comparison to yours, or yours to it, and that's Polanski's Knife in the Water. That's a brilliant sequence early on in the film, and I actually thought of it watching this sequence. Is that an influence for you?
I'm sure it is. I wasn't aware of it until this moment, but Polanski is one of my favorite directors. I really love his absurd work in films like Cul-de-sac and the sick humor and the darkness that go hand in hand in films like The Tenant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a scene like a shot like this makes me think of Polanski.
Yeah. And we were lucky here because, we couldn't light this shot, but, the big gaffer upstairs helped us.
Well, I might be hazarding too vast a generalization here, but it strikes me that many of the filmmakers who come from what might be known as Eastern Europe, whether it's the Balkans or Poland, there's a slightly different sensibility. You, Kieślowski, Polanski, maybe even Kusturica. It's a kind of darkly ironic awareness of the way that human beings are stuck. Sometimes imprisoned by circumstance, whether it is political or historical, or even of your own making, psychological.
I guess, yeah. Even though I never saw it as geographic as much as a matter of, interest and sensibility. You could say that Todd Solondz would belong in the same group, even though he's very New York One of my
Although,
favorite filmmakers.
I think Todd Solondz is quite brilliant myself, but his work rarely takes on what I would call a political or historical dimension. It's always kind of within the nexus of human relationships. When I think about this Eastern European thing, let me put it this way. Poland and Macedonia as nations have both been divvied up and rarely, had moments of real independence. So I think that when you grow up in a country that didn't even exist really on the map, there are all kinds of other tensions in identity than what you might find in a Todd Solondz film. The sense that there was always an oppressive neighbor taking over part of your turf.
Well, still happening.
Exactly.
Mrs. Wentford. London,
So
Amsterdam.
here in this entire sequence where we get to know Alexander and Anna.
And a pregnant woman in the background, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Which will connect to what Anna tells her husband later at the restaurant about herself. The understanding is that Alexander is a famous war photographer,
Right.
but who is feeling a certain degree of guilt about his work.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's a combination of a feeling, a sense for a particular character. I always start with the feeling, and then it's easy to apply the story to it, and then you apply the visuals and everything else. So there was this sense of resignation and guilt in someone who seems sort of rough around the edges until you begin to know him. You begin to understand him, and then the circumstances behind his guilt. There was the Beastie Boys again, by the way. The circumstances behind his guilt are a combination of a story I heard, a real event, and something that I developed afterwards. There's the moment. Yes, I assume you wanted to talk about this moment.
She doesn't realize who she's looking at, but we know that this is Zamira and Kirill.
Right.
This is one of your...
Dramatic irony.
Yeah, you're kind of cheating here, but in such a rich way that I will simply applaud quietly. Namely, we assume, therefore, that Part 2 takes place after Part 1. These people that we knew in Part 1...
The film then moves back to Macedonia with a beautiful section of photography on Macedonia. But what he is trying to bring home to us is the reason that this violence goes on. I'm sure that you all read when these wars were going on. This part of the world, they've been killing each other for centuries. We're not going to stop this. This is his little way of saying, really, probably we're not going to stop it. But this is where this all comes. It's not just religion. It's old tribal belief. It's a refusal to move on in certain ways. It's many, many things. And he subtly shows them in these sections set in Macedonia. The faces are extremely important. At one point, he discusses Anna, the woman who works in television in London, and that her whole interest is in faces, and she looks at people's faces. And he's a photographer, our protagonist, and we understand that he's gone through a tremendous spiritual upheaval because he feels he is implicit in killing. And this is what you can read about with all sorts of especially war photographers. Are they enhancing the killing? Are they encouraging it by being there with their cameras? And also another important message in this film is when we see these separate photographs, and it is the question of photography, how much truth is in it? After all, a photograph is only 1 second. A photograph can be doctored. He wants to present this question to us. And now we're going to watch the opening, the beginning section of the third section of the film, where our main character returns to Macedonia. The filming is exquisite, and you'll hear Annette Insdorf again discussing all of this with the director.
You once called yourself, I think, a cynical optimist, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
My husband last night quoted Isaac Bashevis Singer, namely, if you go through life as a pessimist, you have a good chance of being remembered as a prophet. And I don't know if you feel that might apply to you, but...
Sounds good.
Now here, we return to Macedonia with Alexander
There's
from
my
the
house.
airplane.
No.
Oh, but this is such a different Macedonia from the part
Exactly.
at the beginning.
Exactly.
I mean, no more rural here. So could you tell us a little about how you envision this?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is supposed to feel very urban, and it's contemporary and it's open. It's it's contemporary in the way this country is, and a lot of countries that in the region, and not only in the region, are. I mean, it's Hard Rock and Marlboro and the mosque and the United Nations and filthy streets and happy people and Coca-Cola. So it's a matter of like sketching this contemporary reality, which is only means to conveying the feeling and telling the story. It's not about making a documentary. So this is completely different from part one. You're not even sure you're going to the same place. And that's part of this deception. I like optical illusions and illusions in time. And so you don't know that this is going to take you to the same place where the film started.
I know we're often talking about spoilers in films. I'm not a big believer in this because I don't think that the films that we watch are not so much just for the plot, what happened to them, but I'm going to tell you my view of how this film goes. And Annette Insdorf alluded to it on the commentary as well. The film opens in Macedonia, and we don't know anything. We don't even know where we are. But we see what we understand to be a romance start, an escape from the country, and a death. Screen goes blank. We're in London. We don't know what this has connection with what we just saw. Soon we discover, because the photographs of what we just saw in section 1 are coming through to this lovely woman, Anna, who obviously is the film editor or the producer, and she's getting photographs of what we saw in the first section. Then we start to understand that she's connected with this photographer. More than being an editor, she has a personal connection with him. And then, as the second section of the film ends, we see the horror that goes on in a London restaurant. Again, the director, writer, getting his point across to us that it doesn't matter if you're in London or wherever you are, you're affected by these wars. Suddenly, we cut back, and we're back in Macedonia. And it's set very clearly that we're back in Macedonia, as you saw. Now the story unravels, and it gets confusing to most people who view it, because we say, wait a minute, I thought this character was dead. This is where I want to say, I'm just venturing forth, and Annette Insdorf did much more tactfully than I would have, said, did you mean to confuse the audience? Because there's some things that don't add up in the end. How did you get the pictures of them dead and they're alive now? He answered, well, you can watch these things in various time frames. I thought it was just kind of BS. I think they made a mistake in the editing, to tell you the truth. I really do. But this is not to, ruin the movie. The third section shows us the denouement of the entire thing, the death of the photographer, the views of the country, the idea that it's all going on, and really how, it's very, very difficult to ever find an answer to these things that have been going on for centuries. Let's see Annette Insdorf and the director. In the end of the film, we're going to see this excerpt, and we'll hear them discussing it.
No holes in. Well, there is a hole, but no blood on the shirt.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah.
And I guess if we've been watching the film carefully, seeing a man, a gun, and a tree,
You know what happens.
is not far behind.
Yeah.
But for me, this was such a shock when I first saw the film because I assumed that Alexander has to live because...
Yeah, not in a good tragedy.
uh,
And there's something cathartic about tragedy too. In a way, it's a happy ending. It started to rain. Finally, we're done. We went through the tunnel.
Well, happy ending is not a term I can apply easily to Before the Rain. I'm sorry. I can see it as a rich ending, thought-provoking, troubling.
Cathartic?
Yeah, I'm not sure about cathartic.
Okay.
No, you see, Alexander is my hero to some extent.
But he's smiling. Look at him.
Yeah.
He's finally smiling.
But there are circles of red on his blue shirt. And even if it is finally going to rain, well, no. I'm sorry. But I'm not saying that Before the Rain needed a catharsis to work as a motion picture. It does need a culmination, a dramatic denouement, or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have that in spades. But for me, the death of this character is nothing to feel cathartic about.
Right. But there's something in the... I don't know, it's like in the Requiem. It's sad, but it's elating at the same time.
I won't say elating, it's satisfying or gratifying.
Yes.
On a narrative level, it is gratifying because everything starts to come together in a certain way.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's because I understand, and forgive me if I keep using this term, there's a tragic vision here. In other words, what you're presenting in this motion picture is that the violence endemic within certain cultures and individuals is not going to abate very soon. I mean, that's part of it for me.
Well, let's call it endemic to humankind.
Right. Just perhaps more visible at certain moments in certain countries than in others. But yes, absolutely endemic to humankind.
And it is the satisfaction of maybe things coming together narratively and emotionally, which I guess is what you were saying. And that's what's elating. It's what's elating in the Requiem is that it's such a major pleasure to listen to it, regardless of whether it's sad or not.
Okay. And also the fact that you have rain in sunlight. You're obviously giving us a brighter, in quotes, image.
No, it's just the way the day was. We couldn't afford to wait for an overcast day, but it's raining down there and not raining up here, and it's the satisfaction of the story sort of finally clicking together.
Right. I remember when I first saw the film, I sat up in my seat sharply and I said, oh, "That's the opening scene." He hits the fly off his face.
Haydi. Breve. A breve torecek. Ai krugot der kalesen.
Then I waited for the line, "Time never dies, the circle is not round." And instead, the slight variation of time does not wait because the circle is not round.
Just to make sure whether you're paying attention.
Well, then you are essentially giving the audience the satisfaction that it's like a dividend. In other words, you put your money in a bag when you go to a film. You have your money, but the dividend is that we get that extra level of complicity with the artist, understanding how the story was told in addition to having experienced the story.
And that it's a need to share it, to share the pleasure of putting it together with the viewer.
Yes. Well, I can tell you that as a heightened viewer myself, the pleasure was enormous watching the film the first time as well as the subsequent times. A question.
In reality, what we have here is an epic story. He tried to tell an enormous story. He divided it in 3 parts. Because it covers so many things, it's a Romeo and Juliet story, it's a war story, it's a cultural story, it's a modern day story, all the complications that took place in London. So he was trying for an epic story. And I think the reason that it was accepted with such positive reviews is that he bit off so much and accomplished so much. So let's forgive him. I'm just speaking personally of some things he did that annoyed me like anything. I would have liked it to go more smoothly. I don't see the reason to be throwing in these things to make your audience think, wait a minute, what? He says, as many directors say, sometimes I think to cover up some mistakes, he says, I want my audience paying attention. Well, pay attention. It's a great, great film. It's not perfect, but it is a great film, and I want to know what you think about it. So thank you very much for joining me for this film. Let me know what you think. You're going to have to watch it twice, so I'm just telling you that. I've watched it many times, trying to figure it out. So I've tried to relieve you of that, but you do have to watch it twice. It's an incredibly beautiful, important film. So thank you. See you next time.